Welcome to the Thought Decoders podcast with Sean Mixon. Today we are reading Chapter 2 of Edward J Cornell's An Introduction to Christian Apologetics, the theoretical human predicament. Happy is the man that finds wisdom, and the man that gets understanding, for the gaining of it is better than the gaining of silver, and the profit thereof than fine gold. She is more precious than rubies, and none of the things you can desire are to be compared unto her. Solomon. Christ, the wisdom of God. Paul. If the practical problem of man is dispelling the fear of death through a successful union of the ideal and empirical worlds, the theoretical problem is the location of a rational connection between these realms. Philosophically, this difficulty is known as the problem of the one within the many. The many are the particulars of the time-space universe, while the one is the logical or teleological connection between them. Let us illustrate this problem of the relation between the one and the many by pointing to Luca Signorelli's famous painting, Head of a Youth. If one is to see meaning in the picture, he must not stand too near the canvas or too far from it. If one puts his eye right up to the painting, all coherence in the picture is lost. The black of the hair will appear to be blackness without meaning. But if one moves away from the canvas too far, all he can see is a vague speck on the horizon. He sees the whole, but the whole has no meaning because it lacks the support of the parts. One must come sufficiently close to the picture to see the parts, and yet stay far enough away to see the connection between the parts. In like manner, one cannot see the rationality of the universe unless he keeps close enough to it to see the parts of the universe, and yet far enough away to have a perspective to see the whole as a universe. If we have only a microscopic view of the world, we are in the same plight as the myopic ant who walks across the top of a chair. What it traverses is but a series of flat surfaces and not a chair at all, for it has no perspective to see the whole. If we have a telescopic view of the universe, we have a picture of the whole indeed, but our point of view bears no relevance to the human situation. Section 1. Transition to the theoretical. As tons of blueprints must be drawn up to float one battleship, and as an intern must spend years memorizing those abstractions which make up medical nomenclature, so that he can distinguish the spleen from the stomach in a practical situation, so also the philosopher is required to dip deep into abstract theory before he can produce a practical solution to the problem of the one within the many. If it takes 2 years to build a battleship, there is little wonder that it requires centuries to construct a rational view of the universe. To aid the beginner in his digestion of the theoretical, let us give 2 down-to-earth illustrations of the relation between meaning, the one, and fact, the many. By means of these illustrations, we will show that one cannot even gossip successfully without employing certain philosophic principles. Section A. The problem of significant speech. The problem of the one within the many begins when we open our mouth and speak. In other words, in the simple act of predication. Predication is that act of the mind wherein a predicate is assigned to a subject, as the paper is white. The finished relationship is known as a proposition. When affirmed by the mind, the proposition is referred to as a judgment. All propositions may be analyzed into 3 parts: subject, predicate, and copula. In our illustration, the parts would be paper, white, and is, respectively. Now, absurd as the suggestion may first be to the reader, this simple gesture of predication involves a problem which literally bristles with difficulties. Briefly, how can the one, the predicate, refer meaningfully to the many, the subject? The predicate term is a universal term, that is, it refers to more than one particular. White, for example, is that achromatic color bearing the least resemblance to black. When we say the paper is white, actually we are saying this particular instance of paperness is a case of or may be subsumed under the general class concept whiteness. But what is this strange thing, whiteness? Is it not evident that there are no two things in nature exactly alike? How then can we meaningfully use the term whiteness to refer to many particulars? If one is to be meticulously accurate, a proper name must be given to each individual object in reality. But this is impossible, for the grains of sand in the Sahara would certainly use up all of the names we could conjure up in a lifetime. Without pressing this further, for this is not a textbook in formal logic, let it be known that we solve the problem of speech by dividing the particulars in reality, the many, into teleologically related class concepts, the one. By this expedient, we can carry on meaningful conversation, everything which may be subsumed under the general class furniture for lighting, we call lamp. By defining man as a sentient being capable of worshiping God, we have set this class concept, man, over against other class concepts. This is known as the connotative definition. Through this definition, we set man apart from horses, fleas, and pollywogs, which cannot worship God, and from rocks, trees, and axes, which are not sentient beings. It might pay the reader to meditate upon this problem of predication when next he walks through the woods alone. If he will pursue it, he will find here an illustration of the problem of the one within the many. Section B, the problem of significant action. One may refuse to speak, but he cannot elect not to act, for determination not to act at all is itself an act. Let us here indicate how meaningful action, like meaningful speech, depends upon a solution to the problem of the one within the many. Let us use Socrates as our paradigm here. With the rise of skepticism of the philosophers, the people of Greece turned from virtue to vice. Laws were disregarded, contracts were broken, and the gods were despised. Here again, we see the relation between the practical and the theoretical. Philosophy may not bake bread, but it has a strange power for making people do things. In the younger and hotter minds, this skepticism frequently took the socially disruptive form of the supposition that the only measure of truth and right for any individual is self-interest, the appeal of an idea or a proposed act to him at the time it presents itself. This is known philosophically as ethical relativism, where every man acts as he thinks right in his own eyes. Concerned to rectify the situation, Socrates journeyed early to the marketplace to interrogate men about their souls, promising that if they would faithfully follow the Delphic epigram, "Know thyself," they would be led into normative, ethical action. Man's trouble is his ignorance. Ignorance is the source of vice. When a person supposes that he knows, this appears to be the great source of all the errors of the intellect. The brilliance of Socrates lay in his conviction that morality is an art and that, like all arts, it must be ruled by standards if actions are to be meaningfully thought of as good or bad. For every moral judgment, every judgment with such predicates as just, unjust, temperate, intemperate, right, wrong, involves such a claim to ethical knowledge. Yet this claim is found to be invalid and baseless as soon as those who confidently use such general terms are called upon to define or explain them. The aim of the Socratic interrogation was, therefore, in the first place, to awake a consciousness that knowledge was wanting, and that without it, men were like vessels without a rudder or steersman, and secondly, to teach them the method of reflection and investigation by which alone such ignorance could be removed. Observe what is transpiring here. The criterion for good conduct is the one which provides a standard of classification for the many. Apart from this relation between the one and the many, significant moral judgment is impossible. Socrates, however, failed in his mission, for from the know thyself dictum there came cynics, philosophers who, having known themselves, decided that everything which was not an immediate satisfaction of some primitive want in man was superfluous. All culture, wealth, and refinement were thus excluded from the life of a virtuous man. In this context, Diogenes achieved his immortality by rejecting social conventions and by going through the streets looking for an honest man. The reason why Socrates failed was that he did not provide content for those criteria. The reason Socrates failed was that he did not provide content for those criteria which he so clearly saw were necessary for ethical living. To instruct men to look within is quite futile. Every homicidal maniac claims that his conscience is clear. To tell men, therefore, to look within for an authoritative guide and to trust to their irresistible convictions is to give them a guide which will lead them to destruction. Socrates had defined virtue, the fundamental ethical conception, as insight, and this in turn as knowledge of the good, but had given to the concept of the good no universal content, and in a certain respect had left it open. This made it possible for the most diverse conceptions of life to introduce their views of the ultimate end or telos of human existence into this open place in the Socratic concept. This completes our second illustration of the one within the many. Let us now advance to the overall problem as it pertains to a rational view of the universe. Section 2. The problem of the many. The assignment of the philosopher is huge. He has to make sense out of the whole of reality. The problem of philosophy, therefore, is the problem of predication on a large scale. Whereas in simple predication, one class concept is joined to a particular entity. In a completed philosophy of life, a network of universals and the totality of reality are joined. Let us here carry out our illustration of the portrait, showing the difficulties which attend those who maintain too close a view of the universe, and the problems which attend all who maintain too distant a perspective. Since ancient Greece was literally the kitchen in which most of the philosophic menus were cooked up, let us turn back to that land of philosophers for the most bald presentation of the problem of the one within the many. When Heraclitus declared that all is becoming, and Parmenides said that all is being, the problem which has ever since harassed the minds of countless thinkers was stated in all its stark simplicity. If being is and becoming is not, how can the many and changing be? If becoming is and being is not, how can unity and stability be? Man can neither reasonably doubt experience which testifies to change, nor deny intelligence which reveals at least some permanence in things. Section A. Example of coming too close to the universe of change. The first great empiricists were Heraclitus and Protagoras. Heraclitus handled the metaphysics, and Protagoras the epistemology. Metaphysics and epistemology go together like Scarlatti and the harpsichord. Where you find the one, you immediately think of the other. The first problem of metaphysics is answering the question, what is the nature of reality? To this Heraclitus gave the answer, becoming. For looking out of his window, he saw rivers flowing, trees growing, and babies crawling. If nature is reality, then reality is becoming, for all of nature is in flux. All things are exchanged for fire, and fire for all things, just as wares are exchanged for gold, and gold for wares. All things flow, nothing abides. One cannot step twice into the same river. The first problem of epistemology is answering the question, how can reality be known? Now, it is evident that if reality is nature, the world is change. Then the only way to know it is through the sense of perception. If one expects to know what a pear tastes like, he must open his mouth and try it. Mathematics will not help him here. For Protagoras, then, knowledge is sensation. B. Critique. Let us lump together these two empiricists and show how they failed to solve man's predicament, because they came too close to the flux. What we advance against this early form of empiricism applies equally to all forms of consistent empiricism. Most of the criticisms were set down by Plato in his remarkable dialogue, Theaetetus. 1. Empiricism makes man the author of reality. If knowledge is sensation, then qualities are created by the mind. For the perception of qualities depends upon the physiological state of the observer, as in color blindness. The person who sees red and the person who sees green are equally qualified to report on what the color in rerum natura is. The real color is both, for knowledge is a report of the real, and sensation is knowledge. This is metaphysical skepticism. 2. All judgments are true. If all sensations are knowledge, all are true. Then he who thinks that Protagoras is wrong is making a true judgment. Being wrong, we may dismiss the claims of Protagoras to truth. All judgments are false, since true and false are correlatives. 3. All judgments are false, since true and false are correlatives. That is, each depends upon the other for its meaning. It follows that all being true, there is no true. If there is no true, then all is just as false as it is true. If there is no true, then all is just as false as it is true. Once again, Protagoras' philosophy is false. 4. Changeless criteria are impossible. If all is in flux, then even the proposition all is in flux, and nothing has meaning. Inasmuch as truth is the same today, tomorrow, and forever, there can be no certain and final knowledge if everything perceived by the senses constantly changes. Without changeless criteria, all meaning is destroyed. Society is impossible. Epicharmos already made fun of it by putting it as an argument into the mouth of a debtor who did not wish to pay. How could he be liable, seeing he is not the same man that contracted the debt? 6. Significant speech is impossible. No word can adequately describe reality, since before the word can be gotten out of the mouth, reality has changed. Panta rei. If words cannot be chosen because they fit the facts, then they must be chosen for aesthetic reasons. But further, all answers to any question are equally correct, but all are inexact. For the very words used, even the words this and thus, imply some sort of stability and definiteness, which the theory rules out. 7. Involves subjectivism. 7. Involves subjectivism. Unless truth is changeless, there is no use arguing about anything. For one can never rise above opinion. When we speak of truth, goodness, and beauty, we are just describing how we feel. For if subjectivism is true, the arguments will not succeed in making any pronouncement on the subject to which they purport to relate. They will only succeed in telling us something about the opinions of subjectivists who use them. Thus, if the conclusions which subjectivism asserts are correct, there can be no arguments for them, since the truth both of the argument and of their conclusion must be subjective. Hence, to affirm that subjectivism is true will mean merely that it suits some people, those, namely, who maintain subjectivist views, to believe in it. When subjective truth exists for us, this is skepticism. Truth is a relative thing, a matter of taste, temperament, and education. Metaphysical controversies are therefore utterly vain. 3. The problem of the one. So much for the fate of those who come too close to the universe. Let us now trace briefly the lot of those who withdraw from the universe. A. Example of withdrawing too far from the universe. Parmenides and Gorgias decided that the world of flux was illusory, turning therefore from the spectral character of the phenomenal. They looked to logic and conceivableness to tell them what reality was. As with Hegel, the real is the rational, and the rational is the real. The mobs and the hoi polloi might trust sensation, but not the philosopher. The tumultuous rabble think that the tumultuous rabble think that the real is panem et circenses, bread and circuses. In contemporary terms, this would be a full dinner pail and a weekly movie. For the rationalist, the real is the eternal and changeless realm of coherent truth. The reason why Parmenides and Gorgias rejected the world of sensation was that the senses seemed to say motion was possible, while reason says that it is not. Zeno had proved that motion is impossible. The most popular argument of Zeno is the puzzle of Achilles and the tortoise. Achilles must first reach the place from which the tortoise started. By that time, the tortoise will have gotten on a little way. Achilles must then traverse that, and still the tortoise will be ahead. He is always coming nearer, but he never makes up to it. Change presumably destroys the law of excluded middle by asserting that A is either B or non-B. In change, A is neither B nor non-B. It is becoming. This is illogical. Thus, there is one path only, that being doth be, thought Parmenides. Gorgias took this thought of being over and vaporized it out of existence. And being does not exist, for if it did, it would be either eternal or generated. Now, if it is eternal, for we must begin here, it has no source. Everything generated has some source, but the eternal, because it stands ungenerated, has no source, and not having a source, it is infinite. If, however, it is infinite, it is nowhere. For if it is somewhere, something else would exist in which it would be. And so being, enclosed by something, would no longer be infinite, since that which encloses is greater than the thing enclosed, whereas nothing is greater than the infinite, and so the infinite is nowhere. By this sort of dialectic, the being of Gorgias was worn so thin that it resembles the garment of the king, the fine texture of which everybody pretended to admire, until at last a little child exclaimed, in the simplicity of its heart, "Why, the king is naked." B. Critique. Save for the bad use of logic which Parmenides and Gorgias made, the Christian objection to employment of dialectic as a sole means to know reality is that it leads inevitably to a neglect of the world of blood and sweat and tears, the world in which the human drama is transpiring. There is a changing world here which must be explained. Until it is, man cannot find happiness. The courage of the rationalist to think that the real and the rational are the same grows out of an erroneous notion of the connection between the many. His hope is that all connections are logically necessary, that is, deductive. He believes that to know one blade of grass thoroughly, would be to give one enough information to deduce necessarily the totality of reality. The Christian rejects this on the ground that the relation between the number of blades of grass in Bolivia and the king pythons in Africa is teleological, not necessary. By knowing a tree, one cannot, by logical definition, determine where Napoleon fought his battles. For the Christian, the source of unity is the mind of Christ, a source which unifies the particulars in the time-space universe according to theology. From him and through him and to him are all things. To him be glory forever. Romans 11:36. For the Christian, God, not logic, is the ultimate reason for things. For God is the author of logic itself. The reason for this will appear subsequently. Section 4. The persistent philosophical danger. A. The contemporary problem. We are still tempted to make an either or affair of what must be a both and. We cannot choose between logic and experience. Without logic, our experience cannot be normative. Without experience, our logic cannot be relevant to the human situation. This problem, like the poor, is always with us. Either one describes the universe, the spiritual as well as the physical, in terms of material existence and of the objectivity, and then one has to go as far as to epiphenomenalism and consent never to meet anything that might resemble what we call consciousness, idea, finality, or will. Or else one agrees to place oneself at a given moment into the very center of consciousness and to start from the cogito. In this latter case, one will meet above the Heraclitean, becoming the Platonic world of essences, and at the same time the inevitable problems of idealism and realism, of the subjective and the objective, of being and thought. Such is the alternative which, even after the admirable attempt made by Mr. Dewey, seems to us still to confront human reflection. B. The Christian's attitude. Both levels of reality are admitted by the Christian, the normative, the one, and the contingent, the many. The world of the many, one. Paul sets the mood of the Christian as he pleads for the empirical proofs for Christ's death and resurrection, confessing, I am persuaded that none of these things has escaped his notice. For this was not done in a corner. The maid may sweep the dirt in the corner to hide it, but Christ was raised openly before men. As a verification of the Christian faith, then, the Christian shall plead the veracity of the biblical interpretation of the many. Christianity is a philosophy which meets the real world. 2. The world of the one. Christ is the principle of the one and the author of the many, for in him all things were created, through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. Christ is the I am, possession of possession of the knowledge of Christ. Thus, is possession of the highest form of reality. For this reason, the Christian admonishes men that there is a difference in value between the two levels of being. God is necessary being, while his creation is contingent being. Being contingent upon God's will, it is this will, and not an antecedent system of logic, which gives meaning to the movement of the time-space world. The many are teleologically related to each other according as God has decreed the end, telos, of things. For this reason, the Church Universal preaches that the chief end of man is to love God and to enjoy him forever. The possession of God is likened in Holy Writ to the ownership of a treasure hid in a field. So valuable is the treasure that a wise man is willing to sell all that he has for it. Again, it is likened to a great pearl of more worth than all pearls. For the possession of this pearl, a prudent man will do likewise. It is in this context of the problem of the one within the many and the orders of being that the parable of the rich fool is to be interpreted. The man who prefers barns and wealth to the author of barns and wealth is a fool, even as it is the fool who says in his heart, there is no God. The fool is he who, having failed to solve the one within the many on its highest level, misses the point in life and chooses to follow a way which seems right to him, but the end thereof are the ways of death. Thanks for joining the Thought Decoders podcast with Sean Mixon. Hope you enjoy it, and always remember to think better.